Thank you, everybody. Again, very, very sorry for our delay in starting, but welcome. Today, we are joined by Jeremy Fake of Hyperfish, and we are going to look at how Hyperfish can automate your profile management across your organization. So, start off, I'm going to go very, very high level pitch about what Seers do, and then I'll hand over to Jeremy. So Seers have a number of different areas that we cover, and I'm not going to go into each of these in detail. The slides should explain what we do as an organization. And if you see what we are doing as an organization, you will understand the value that we put into user profile management. User profile management across intranets, Office 365 migrations, workflow, we see as being particularly important. If you manage the user profile correctly, everything then becomes a lot easier to find people in your directory, to make sure people have the correct access and so forth. The types of work we've been doing is around intranet replacements, where we've been putting a large amount of emphasis on user profile management, and also around where we're transforming people's applications using products such as Nintex. And the workflow elements of this has a great degree of requirement of getting those profiles correct. And when Jeremy does his presentation and explanation of Hyperfish, it will really start to make sense of where this fits and why it's so important. Just some of our clients as an organization, where we're seeing a great deal of traction against all the different areas that we're covering. And I don't want to labor too long on why Seers. It's important, but more importantly is to have Jeremy talk to you about the great value that Hyperfish brings to your organization. And I'll come back later in the call, but I'm going to hand control to Jeremy. I'm obviously very aware that we're late starting. I don't want to hold you up too long. So I'll give Jeremy control, and then I will speak to you later toward the end of the call. I'm sure I have some questions by then, and then we'll be able to ask Jeremy those. So whilst we're going through the presentation, if you have some questions, I'll open the lines toward the end, or you can put your hand up and we'll make sure that we get those addressed. So Jeremy, over to you.
Excellent, thanks Ian. I should be letting me jump on here. Essentially what I wanted to talk about was what we do at Hyperfish and how it kind of relates to what the other webinars in the series. You've been displaying things from like Nintex and what you're doing in Office 365. And what we saw when we kind of released this product was essentially that where people were moving from this world where they had SharePoint server and they had Exchange server and they had Link server, each of those user experiences was very different. And that was primarily because, and something I get some insight into by being up here in Redmond and Seattle, was that they all have different engineering groups in different buildings up here in Redmond campus for Microsoft, and they don't often talk too much. And what happened with the transition of Office 365 is that because it's a unified service now, it's moved to this world where really the people are at the center, and every one of these user experiences basically has all of the information about users, but they're having this like common view now. And so whether I'm in Delve and I'm looking at kind of Megan Bowen here, who's a director in a particular office location with their about me information and skills, past projects, etc. Or even if I've kind of rolled out Microsoft Teams, and with Teams, we can see org charts as well as all the information that we're familiar with inside of Delve. Now, if you're not in Office 365 yet, you would have kind of experienced things like these contact cards, like John Smith's one here, where being able to click to dial on their cell numbers and see their job titles and departments, and whether they're active in their instant messenger inside Skype for Business or Link, or now with Microsoft Teams. It's really important that that information's there. And there's been a lot of move towards having this consistency of profile information like this. Now, we have a free product that essentially did some analysis if you opted in as a trial customer, that looked at what information was actually stored in people's profiles inside of Office 365 and on premises in Active Directory. And what we saw, unfortunately, is that over 80% of the users in most of the organizations were actually missing core information like manager and job title. And for people just kind of understand that that can really lead to some pretty bad experiences where your contact cards don't have photos in them and there's no information populated in the contact cards. But it can also mean things like your org charts don't work in those contact cards, whether it's in Outlook or in that screenshot that's actually in Microsoft Teams. But more importantly, if you're kind of bought into what's going on in Delve, you'll see that things like popular documents aren't going to work because it doesn't understand the notion of your organizational chart to know who your peers are and your colleagues are. And so it can't show you documents that are being collaborated on by people around you in your organization. There's some inference it can do later on as you open documents other people have created, but the org chart is the primary way that the graph works within Office 365. Now, to kind of tack on from the webinar last week with Nintex, a lot of people are trying to deploy approval workflows where someone submits timesheets or expenses and they have to be routed through to the manager or maybe the manager's manager as part of that approval phase before the expenses get reimbursed or timesheets get logged properly. And without that manager field, it's really hard to automate those business processes within your environment. One thing that really bugged me when I was at a larger org inside of Microsoft, I don't really have that problem so much at Hyperfish because we've kind of got everyone on speed dials, is that clicking to dial in contact cards, if they don't have the correct formats in there for extensions, made it super hard to kind of go back in and hack those numbers to get them to work in Skype for Business. And you might think, well, these are quite menial things, but if you add that up on a day-to-day basis of what's, how it's impacting each individual's productivity inside an organization, been quite significant. And unfortunately, another pattern that we've seen is that a lot of organizations have that data somewhere, whether they're HR team or due diligent and they have job titles and departments and office locations and so forth for their employees in their own HRMS systems, but there's just no easy way to get those back inside of things like SharePoint and Office 365 and Exchange. And so our product Hyperfish is really about taking some of these advancements in artificial intelligence and chatbot technology to try and move from this notion of John Smith having nothing in his profile to having a populated profile. And the way that we do that essentially is we'll go in and analyze either Active Directory on premises or Azure Active Directory in the cloud and highlight what's missing or incorrect based on rules that you decide on and configuring the product as part of that organization. And essentially, for those people that are either missing or incorrect, we'll actually notify those users either via email or right now we have a Skype bot that will reach out to Skype for Business users and let them know. And we'll also have a Microsoft Teams bot coming too. And then they have this ability to go in and update their form. So if I just kind of go back over to a demo environment here, what you'll actually see is that I can show a scenario where Justin here gets an email, and inside of this email, essentially it's going to have a personalized message there of what things are readily available and kind of customized to them. So the fact that he's missing skills and a manager field and he's not got his profile photo in here. But you'll notice that we're kind of having this conversation in a tone that in this demo environment is very familiar to them in how they communicate with their employees on a day-to-day basis. So we have this ability to change how you do that tone based on how your company is. And we can do things like brand the emails and change kind of what the action buttons are in this sense as well. And then when I click on the button here, what that's actually going to do is launch into a profile page, which can be branded for your experience. And this allows me to go through and do a few really nice things with regards to photos. And so essentially what I got the ability to do here is I can come in here and pick a photo and pick that and update that into my browser. So I'm just going to move something so I can actually see that quickly in here. And what you'll notice is that, sorry, I've just realized I've removed my demo photo from my environment. So let me just quickly go grab one off the internet so you can see an example of this in motion. And what we do is we're using artificial intelligence to essentially pick whether the image is appropriate or not. So if I come in here and have a look at this photo and upload it, I can kind of crop this to how I like. If I picked a photo that didn't have or had multiple people in it, or maybe it was a cartoon or a cat or a dog, essentially it would tell me that that photo wasn't appropriate and I'd have to go and upload another photo. So it's a great way of getting consistent photos across your organization. Now, in addition to that, with the wizard approach, we're able to do things like type ahead to pick my manager from a people picker. And then ultimately with things like we can enforce a list of specialized job titles here in the drop downs. And I guess where this becomes really, really powerful for organizations is for scenarios like departments, rather than running that risk of someone putting in IT or information technology or IS or I.T. We can enforce that everyone's job title is information technology, or everyone's department is information technology. What that means is if when we do our analysis overnight that there's anyone that essentially has had non-conforming job titles, it'll promote them via these mails and let them know that their job title is not correct and that I'll have to come through this wizard to fix it. Once it's updated, we don't just automatically go and write that back to Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. What we'll actually do is, in some instances, we can have some approval process steps in here as well. And what that means is, as an organization, we can do things, if I just refresh this page, where I can start to see that Justin didn't have a photo and now he has a photo there and there's his new job title. And as either Jeremy's manager or Justin's manager, or maybe as someone like on the office manager that looks after approving photos, you can start to have these approvals happen before they get committed back into the system. Now, the benefit of all this is that we can actually configure this very easily for our attribute screen. And so we give you all of the out-of-the-box settings that come with Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, and SharePoint user profiles, depending on your environment setup. And so that what this means is, as an organization, you can kind of do these types of rules where you could say that every user within our Office 365 must require a manager field, a job title, and department. And what we can do is, in our formatting rules, which is basically how we define whether things are valid and correct and not incorrect, is I can start to populate what job titles are those job titles which are the official job titles. And we could do some bulk updates here through CSV files as well. And the same thing can be done for things like skills too. So if in your organization you have a popular set of skills, you have the ability there to really enforce that people are picking the same thing, like public speaking, as an option rather than kind of putting in whatever they choose. And then just to kind of summarize what this is really about, we have the ability, and there's a little cheap magic wand I can do here to kind of showcase what that might look like over time, is, you can go from an organization where you had 13% complete profiles to, in this case, 81%. And this is quite common that it's 81 because essentially there's a lot of service accounts and so forth that you may not be concerned with. And you can even go down and drill down and say, okay, well, we still have quite a low amount of profile photo adoption. So we probably need to amp up how aggressive our bots are in terms of how many times they chase each other, chase the employees to follow up on updating their information. Now, as time goes by, what we've found is customers will potentially make more and more of these fields required, and so progressively get better at kind of what information is available for employees, but start with those core information that's shown across all those different contact cards, and obviously the manager field for things that it unlocks in terms of business process management, and also things like the org chart kind of discovery and navigation. And so that kind of gives you hopefully a good kind of summary of what Hyperfish can do for an organization in terms of completing those profiles. And with this demo, essentially showing you how easy it is to set this and configure it from that aspect. And if I just jump back to the slides quickly, what you'll actually see is that, just to kind of summarize what we're doing here is, it's really about automating the whole process end to end. And our product is very geared around profiles in general and making sure that we're following the rules that you define within the product. But I think one of the big things that we hear feedback from customers is that they want something that's super easy to use, and users don't want to have to know that they have to go to this system to update skills and that system to update job title and this system to go to update their photo. They just want to go to one form to be able to do those updates. And so that's why it's really important. It's easy for the users, both on a desktop machine, a tablet, or a mobile phone. And then in addition to that, it's really important from a compliance perspective to make sure that in real time, we're continuously monitoring those environments to make sure that whatever rules you've put in place are complied with from within the organization. So if you'd like to know more, you can either obviously speak to the guys on the call here and set up more time to discuss Hyperfish, or you can actually read more about us at hyperfish.com on our website, where there's product videos and even a free sign up to our free product, which works for fixing just the photos within your organization in an Office 365 setup. So with that, I would just ask, is there any questions that have popped up based on everyone that's on the call, Ian?
Look, I do have some questions that have actually been sent to me. So let me just go back to, we'll leave it on your screen just in case you want to go and show anything here, Jeremy. I've got, one of the questions is that the scenario is that when organizations, new people join, the IT group get to set up the user with AD accounts and everything else as they typically do. This is done in conjunction with an HR system that they have and the IT group have to maintain. What their question is can Hyperfish integrate to the existing system so they don't have to set up accounts in the HR system and then AD and then move the data and everything between the two? Is it possible to have a scenario where the user is part of the onboarding process, gets the email or to start putting their own information in, and then populates across different places inside the business?
Yeah, this is quite a common one, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit in the slides there. And the big part about this is that by default, the way we work is our attributes will all be sourced from the system of record being Active Directory, where it exists. So for people familiar with AD, those are all the internal names for AD fields that exist. And then inside of some of these attributes, they're not actually in AD. So we have some fields here that are coming from the SharePoint user profiles, like the About Me and the skills and so forth. But in addition to that, we do have people that cheat a little bit and will use Active Directory attributes that are not used within their organization, whether it's pager or admin display name are quite popular ones. And so is things like post office box and aspects of that. But we also have the ability that when you click add an attribute, if you build a connector, you can actually go in and find those fields from the other systems and treat those as the system of record. So I'll use the SharePoint one as an example here of showing how I can go look to see all the different properties that a user can have that Hyperfish can monitor and you can configure rules for. And one that we actually see a lot of people using is the, and I think maybe I've already added it to my demo, is the birthdays. There you go. And so what you can actually do is you could just say, well, we want to click the birthdays of all these users here. And then in the scenario where it writes back directly to a Workday or maybe to a PeopleSoft or an SAP. But in addition to writing back to a PeopleSoft or an SAP or a Workday or another system you want to connect to, what we can also do is say, look, we actually want to also write that to Active Directory or SharePoint user profiles. Now, in the case of a birthday, you might not want to write the year back into somewhere that is public accessible by the employee. You might want to store that for your HRMS system, but you might want to just have the month and the day written to the SharePoint user profile so it shows up in various different formats, and also that then you can use it and other business applications can use that data. And so as part of that, we have this notion of connectors that can write back to HRMS system as a system record. But then we also have triggers that can fire once it's committed to the system of record to write to other places with whatever kind of custom things you want to do. So for instance, just remove the year and write it to SharePoint user profiles, or not at all. So for instance, if you were asking for things like their employee code that might not be relevant for everyone in the company to see in a phone book, but they just want the users to be able to pipe it in, that could be just captured by the Hyperbot through the profile updates and written back into the HR system. So it doesn't interfere with the existing HR processes, but you get the nice user experience where all of these fields are all in one place. So the user doesn't have to jump around to SAP to update their date of birth and then jump into SharePoint user profiles to update things like their About Me and skills. So they can all live in this one kind of experience. And also all of them can have those approval workflows across them as well.
Excellent. And my assumption would then be that it automatically syncs into the Office 365 accounts as well when they've done that.
Yes. Yeah. So by default, essentially the way that we kind of tackle it is it will write to the lowest common denominator, which in this case would be Active Directory on-prem in a hybrid setup, or Azure Active Directory if you're in a completely Office 365 environment. And then the synchronization that exists out of the box will kind of bubble that up to SharePoint user profiles and Exchange profile store. One thing to note is some of those syncs can take up to 72 hours. It's something that Office 365 really hasn't focused on fixing. And so by using our triggers, you can actually accelerate that so it's instant. So rather than waiting for the sync to write the update that you push to AD into SharePoint user profiles, we can have AD as a system of record, but then trigger and write straight to SharePoint user profiles. And that's how our product helps with this like kind of frustration where, well, I updated my profile, but I'm not seeing it change across my Office 365 environment. That's because we bypass the delay, the lag there in the sync and just write straight to it.
Okay, fantastic. Now I have a question here, which is this an Office 365 only product, or is there an on-premise capability as well, or can you run it in a hybrid mode?
Yeah, so the way that the product works, we knew obviously that not everyone's sucked the Kool-Aid down of being all in on the Office 365 and all in on the cloud. And so if they are all in on Office 365, we basically connect directly to the Microsoft Graph, and essentially as part of the onboarding flow, you just have to consent that you're happy with the Hyperfish service, reading and writing to the user profiles. But in a hybrid environment where you've still got an Active Directory server somewhere in your network, we will deploy an agent that runs as a particular service account with very specific privileges to read and write to user profiles you deem it needs to have control over. And then our service in the cloud talks down to the agent that's within your network, and that agent does all the hard grind of updating the Active Directory. And then again, we rely on AD Connect to push that data to Azure Active Directory, and then all the magic of the Office 365 synchronization so it gets proliferated everywhere else.
Fantastic. So another question here is there a limit on the number of users that IT can manage using Hyperfish? They have a potential scenario where they have a couple of thousand users in AD. So what's the scalability like, Jeremy? Is it easy to scale across large volumes of users?
Yeah, the benefit we have of our service is that we've actually built our service for the cloud. And we had in mind, obviously, we're going to get customers that have 100 users in their AD. But we have had some organizations that when they've signed in, they've had 1.5 million users inside of their Azure Active Directory. And so from that aspect, we do scale in terms of the analyzer that's going to wake up and check all those profiles, but also just in terms of the general activity that goes on in terms of the profile updates and the approvals that are happening inside of the engine as well.
Great. And that leaves, I guess, we're talking the analyzer. Does the analyzer also allow people, the IT department, to see how frequently or infrequently an account has been accessed, so to try and identify people that no longer work in the organization that may not have been decommissioned?
Yeah, we don't have a report right now that kind of tackles that to that particular scenario. What we do have, though, is this ability to see the users that are missing particular attributes. So, for instance, if I went in here and typed in profile profile picture here, that's going to go and produce a report that highlights everyone that hasn't responded to the profile photo. And so you have the ability to kind of jump in and see information around these users. Now, in this case, in my demo environment, these users aren't official licensed users, but I can go in here and see the history of how many emails they've been sent and which one essentially they're not responding to them. And so that can kind of give me a little bit of an idea of whether people are interacting. We don't purposely have a report which is like, is the user completely not logging into Office 365 or not? And that's where I'd kind of rely on reporting out of the box around active usage, that where you can kind of flag those things as well.
Yeah. Okay. Now, another point that's been raised is, and it sort of ties in with our next webinar we'll be talking about, which is driving intranet adoption, intranet in a box. Does this, have you seen this in your experience help drive adoption of intranet? And also, can hyperficials be used to accelerate the population of org charts? Well, I know there's a number of third-party apps on the market that allow you to build org charts. Have you seen those as areas that people have found A, driving adoption, and B, making those org charts more relevant?
Yeah, it's been interesting. When we first came up with the product, we realized from an intranet perspective that there was a lot of demand to have an employee phone book, for instance, that would readily work for the intranet. It's like kind of one of the first things people try and get working on an intranet. And it's a great way to kind of, the term sticky, get people to keep coming back to that intranet for useful kind of tools like a phone book. And so the people search with out of the box that comes with SharePoint, whether it's SharePoint Server or SharePoint Online, relies on the user profiles to be up to date. And so that definitely helps to drive the adoption of one of the key kind of no-brainer things that gets put on the intranet. The org charts, as you just said as well, is another big one. And there's a bunch of players, and I just recently did a blog post on blog.hyperfish.com that talks a lot about those particular different options that are out there from an org chart product aspect as well. And again, without having the manager field, those org charts can't render and be built. So that definitely helps for those kind of scenarios where people are trying to discover people in their org and understand, how that's helping them in that aspect as well.
Fantastic. That's great. Now, I guess a question from me, plenty of questions from other people, but I have one as well. When you are talking to your clients, and you've got a number of successful ones, I'm aware of that, and some great case studies, what do you feel are sort of the top 3 benefits that you're seeing that are common across your client, the people that have adopted Hyperfish?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the first one, because we've done a lot of case studies and we've had to interview a lot of our customers. I think the first one that seems to be really common across everyone we've interviewed of like, how has this helped, has been this essence of trusting what's in Outlook contact cards and trusting what's inside of Delve as when I'm dialing a phone number, I know that's going to be the right phone number. Whereas before it was kind of like a roll of the dice on whether this phone number was actually going to work or not. And, in larger orgs, and I have this in Microsoft where, when you're in you're meeting up with someone that's invited you to a meeting, often if it's a one-on-one meeting, they don't put their office location in the meeting invite. And so you have to go into a corporate directory to go find which office location they're in and what booth or open plan part of the building they're in. And so having that information in there that's kind of, it's going to be up to date because of the fact that everybody knows this is where they go to update their profile information is really important. And so I think that was the first kind of major takeaway. The second one from which people kind of saw was, and this is why we kind of produced this as a free product, was that profile photos being populated for everybody made a really big difference from this notion of, especially in remote workers or where people are across the country or maybe across continents, having photos for everyone in the org, whether I'm in Outlook and I'm reading email or whether someone pings me on Skype for Business on Teams, makes a really big difference to recognizing that person when you finally meet them in person. And I've had this experience where when I was in Microsoft and I was kind of communicating with these people, and then you finally get to meet them, and having that face profile photo as I'm doing those emails for the first few weeks before you get to meet them in person when they're in town makes a really big difference, and kind of builds that kind of that digital bond that you didn't have before by staring at silhouettes. And so that was kind of the second one, was this kind of growing the success of the digital workplace aspects by kind of making people feel closer to each other. And then the last one that's really common across everybody is this notion of skills. People are finding it more and more important to have not just their contact details and their job title and department inside profiles, but going to that next level of going, we really want people to put in what their skills are. So that as a scenario, we had a customer the other day that was saying that they've got a bunch of project managers now that are finding it way easier to go find the right people in the organization to be on these kind of matrix projects that are cross department and cross division, because they can go search for those people based on what skills people have tagged on their profiles. Before, what they were actually doing was using LinkedIn public profiles and trying to find the people in the org that way. But because skills tend to be very specific to the company, and obviously there's certain skills that might not be on LinkedIn, or people don't update their LinkedIn skills, that being able to do that skills search within the organization's employee directory has allowed these projects to go and kind of uncover these hidden resources that people weren't aware of before, that were in another office, or maybe in the same office, and maybe sitting just next to them in an open plan. And so they were that was another big takeaway that we've seen, is that because this bot can keep regularly reaching out to people and letting them know that things are missing or incorrect, or maybe just to review their profile and add additional skills, that profiles tend to be at the top of everyone's mind, and it's very quick to update, and so they see that value in keeping the profiles rich.
And I would hazard, I guess, another huge benefit is the saving that they see in having IT teams having to manually update those spreadsheets and then transpose that into Active Directory. So that's I suppose an obvious saving.
Yeah, we've heard all sorts of stories. I think the biggest one we've heard is they hired two interns, and I felt very sorry for these interns. Although they got to network pretty well, they went around the entire building of 700 staff and collected all their information in a spreadsheet. And then once the spreadsheet, after 3 months, was finally updated with all the information, the AD guys updated the profiles. But obviously by then, 3 months later, a lot of that had changed. The office locations, job titles. And so, it just really didn't work well. And so having this where the employees self-service updating their profiles is kind of critical to making sure that things get updated in real time, rather than kind of the manual, laborious ways that people do things now.
Well, I think we've had a pretty good view there, Jeremy, of how Hyperfish can really help automate the adoption and the updating of user profiles, and how we're in practical terms seeing that applied across your clients. I don't see any more questions being asked. If anyone has any more questions, or has a question they'd like to pose now, if you could do so, that'd be great. Otherwise, I will thank all of you for joining today and taking your time out. And again, I'll apologize just that we're a bit late starting, but I really appreciate you waiting until we got those technical issues ironed out. And I'd also like to thank Jeremy for his time. It's evening time where you are, I believe, Jeremy, so you're probably going to finish for the day. But I really appreciate you taking your time out.
No, you're welcome. My wife's just putting our kids to bed, so I managed to avoid that this time around.
Lucky you. So once again, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for everyone for joining. I have the details on screen here where you can contact us. I will send this video out to you in the next day or so. I'll just edit that down, and I'll send that out. And if you'd like to ask any questions outside of this call, our contact details are here. Please don't hesitate to do so. Once again, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon on our presentation where we will be looking at intranet in a box and the benefits that brings to organizations. Once again, thank you for joining. Goodbye.